The air in Port Sentinel, Michigan, carried a persistent gray chill off Lake Superior. It was a place where the scent of pine and cold, clean water hung heavy, where the cries of gulls were a lonely, constant soundtrack to the rhythmic surge of the Great Lakes. A cold drizzle, more a mist than a true rain, put a sheen on the historic brick streets and painted the sky and water in 1,000 shades of slate. It was a fitting atmosphere for a funeral, and even more fitting for the reading of a will that was just as cold and final. Inside the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Fletcher and Associates, the air was thick with the smell of old paper, lemon polish, and a palpable, simmering greed. Navy SEAL Jack Corrigan sat perfectly still on a stiff wingback chair that groaned under his disciplined weight. On a brief leave from the relentless motion of deployment, he felt more out of place here than he ever had in the deserts of the Middle East or the humid jungles of some forgotten corner of the world. His suit, a necessary concession to the occasion, felt like a cage around his lean, muscular frame, a body honed by ceaseless training into a weapon. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing, cataloging the anxious twitches and avaricious glances of his relatives with the same detached analysis he'd used to assess a target. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Mr. Fletcher, a man with thinning gray hair and a weary expression that suggested he'd presided over too many familial dissections like this one. He peered over his spectacles, his voice as dry as rustling parchment as he began. "We are gathered here to execute the final will and testament of my client and friend, Samuel Corrigan." A collective, almost imperceptible shift went through the room. Jack's aunt, Linda, a severe woman with a mouth perpetually pursed into a thin line of disapproval, dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. Her son, Mark, sat beside her, his expensive suit straining over a physique that had gone soft with a life of comfort and privilege. A smirk played at the corner of his lips as he caught Jack's eye, a look of condescending pity that Jack had seen countless times before. To them, he was the prodigal son who had run off to play soldier, the odd one out who didn't understand the family business or their subtle power games. Mr. Fletcher cleared his throat and continued, his words falling like hammer blows in the tense silence. "To my sister, Linda Wallace, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my portfolio of municipal bonds." Linda's feigned grief vanished, replaced by a flash of triumph. Mark patted her hand, his own smile widening. He was next, receiving a similar cash sum and the family's lake house on Lake Charlevoix. The inheritances continued, a methodical distribution of a lifetime's accumulated wealth. Each name read was a confirmation of Samuel Corrigan's calculated distance, a final accounting of relationships that had been more transactional than affectionate. Jack felt nothing. His grandfather had been a phantom in his life, a figure of myth and whispered rumor. Samuel was the man who had taught a young Jack how to shoot a rifle with unerring accuracy and track a white-tailed deer through the dense woods, but had never once shared a story of his own past. He was a puzzle Jack had long ago given up trying to solve. Finally, Mr. Fletcher paused, adjusting his glasses as he looked down at the last page. "And to my grandson, Jack Corrigan." The room went silent. Mark leaned forward, his smirk frozen into a mask of pure condescension. What could possibly be left for the outcast? A sentimental watch? A dusty collection of books? I leave my entire property on Granite Point, known as the Lookout, including the land and all structures thereon for his own free use. A beat of silence. Then, a stifled snort escaped Mark. "The Lookout?" he scoffed, his voice ringing in the quiet room. "You've got to be kidding. That old relic." Aunt Linda waved a dismissive hand. "It's nothing, Mark. Just that old observation post from the shipping days. It's been rotting on that cliff for 50 years. Mark leaned back, shaking his head with dramatic pity. "Congratulations, cousin. You've inherited a pile of rust and concrete overlooking the lake. What are you going to do with it? Watch for freighters?" The small ripple of laughter from his side of the family was sharp and venomous. Jack's jaw tightened, but his expression remained a mask of placid indifference. He had faced down men with guns and explosives. His cousin's petty barbs were less than mosquitoes in a thunderstorm. He gave a single nod to Mr. Fletcher, a silent acknowledgement. The meeting was over. As they filed out of the office, Mark clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that was anything but friendly. "Seriously, Jack, if you need a few bucks to cover the property taxes on your new fortress, just let me know. Family helps family, right?" Jack met his eyes directly, his stormy gaze unblinking. "I'll be fine, Mark." He stepped out of the building and into the crisp, freshwater air. The drizzle had thickened, and the fog was rolling in dense off the lake, swallowing the tops of the ore docks in the distance. He stood for a moment, letting the cool mist settle on his face. The laughter and whispers from the office faded behind him. Irrelevant noise. "The Lookout." He remembered his grandfather mentioning it only once years ago, an unreadable flicker in the old man's eyes. It was an isolated place, a sentinel on the edge of the great water. Worthless, they had all said, a liability. But Samuel Corrigan was not a sentimental or a foolish man. Every action he took, every word he spoke, was deliberate, weighed with a purpose few could fathom, leaving him this forgotten legacy. It wasn't an insult. It was a message. A final riddle from an enigma of a man. He walked to his old but reliable Ford pickup parked down the street. As he opened the driver's side door, a large, intelligent head lifted from the passenger seat. Kaiser, his German shepherd, regarded him with unwavering loyalty. The dog's powerful body, a tapestry of black and tan fur, was coiled with the potential energy of a warrior at rest. A veteran of 2 deployments himself, Kaiser was Jack's companion, his shadow, and the only living creature who understood the silences that so often enveloped him. The dog let out a low, questioning whine. Jack slid into the driver's seat, the familiar smell of dog and worn leather a comfort. He reached over and scratched behind Kaiser's alert ears, the dog leaning into his touch. "Well, buddy," Jack said, his voice a low rumble. They were the first words he'd spoken in over an hour. "Looks like our leave just got interesting." He turned the key and the truck's engine roared to life, a stark contrast to the gentle hiss of rain on the windshield. He didn't look back at the law office or the town full of a family that had never understood him. Instead, he pulled away from the curb and headed north, toward the winding coastal highway, toward the cliffs, and toward a pile of rust and concrete that held the last secret of a man he barely knew. He had a feeling the lookout was more than just a forgotten relic. It was a key, and he was about to find the lock it opened. The highway north of Port Sentinel became a twisting ribbon of wet asphalt, hugging the dramatic contours of the Lake Superior shoreline. The Ford pickup, a steady beast against the elements, climbed steadily into the hills, leaving the city lights to dissolve into the thick, rolling fog behind them. The higher they went, the wilder the landscape became. Towering white pines, their boughs heavy with rainwater, pressed in on the road, forming a dark, living tunnel. The roar of the lake, once a distant whisper, had grown to a resonant, ever-present heartbeat that vibrated through the floorboards of the truck. Kaiser, who had been resting his head on the center console, suddenly lifted his muzzle, his ears perked to catch a scent on the wind. He emitted a low growl, a deep rumble in his chest. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, his hand instinctively going to the dog's ruff. "We're almost there." He turned off the main highway onto a narrow, unmarked service road nearly swallowed by ferns and underbrush. The asphalt gave way to gravel, and the last mile was a jarring, uphill climb on a track that was more a scar on the mountainside than a road. Finally, through a break in the trees and the swirling mist, he saw it. The lookout. It wasn't a house. It was a statement. Perched on the very lip of a sheer granite cliff, it was a stark blend of weathered timber and stained concrete, designed to withstand the fury of a November gale. It looked more like a stubborn World War II bunker that had decided to grow a log cabin on its back than a home. The windows were narrow slits like the eyes of a fortress, and a wide deck, its railings bleached to the color of bone, jutted out over the churning abyss below. It was isolated, imposing, and magnificent. Jack parked the truck in a small clearing and cut the engine. The only sound was the wind whistling around the structure and the crash of waves hundreds of feet below. Kaiser was already out of the truck, his body tense, his nose working ceaselessly as he circled the perimeter. Jack's own senses were on high alert. He wasn't seeing an inheritance. He was assessing a tactical position. The location offered a near 360-degree field of view. The only access road was a natural choke point. Any approach would be visible for miles. He went to the front door, a heavy slab of timber that looked ancient, but his trained eye picked out the details. The frame was reinforced with steel, and the lock was a heavy-duty deadbolt, far stronger than what was needed for a simple cabin. He used the old brass key Mr. Fletcher had given him. The lock turned with a well-oiled click, and the door swung inward without a sound. The air inside was still and cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of cedar and lake salt. Dust motes danced in the pale light filtering through the narrow windows. The main room was Spartan, 2 worn leather armchairs, a simple wooden table, and a bookshelf filled with volumes on maritime history, navigation, military strategy, and local geology. But the thing that dominated the space was the fireplace. It was a massive construction of dark, rounded fieldstones that took up nearly an entire wall, its firebox large enough to stand in. As Jack did a slow, methodical sweep of the room, Kaiser ignored everything else. The dog made a beeline for the great stone hearth and stopped. He whined, a high, anxious sound, and paced back and forth before the firebox. Then he began to scratch, his powerful claws clicking insistently against one of the large, flat stones that formed the base. "Kaiser, what is it?" Jack said quietly, coming to stand behind him. The dog didn't stop. He looked up at Jack, gave a sharp, commanding bark, and went back to scratching, his entire body focused, his K9 training rising from some deep, instinctual place. He wasn't chasing a mouse. He was indicating. Trust the dog. It was the first rule of working with a K9 partner. Jack knelt, running his hands over the stone Kaiser was fixated on. It felt like the others, cold and solid. But as he pressed along its edges, his fingers found a seam almost invisible to the naked eye. It wasn't mortared in place. He pushed. Nothing. He tried to slide it. It didn't budge. This was a puzzle. He examined the intricate pattern of the surrounding stones, looking for a trigger, a switch. His gaze settled on a smaller, fist-sized stone set into the fireplace face above. It was carved with a faint, intricate compass rose, a design that seemed out of place. He pressed it. A low, deep thud echoed from within the hearth, and the stone beneath his knees receded an inch with a soft hiss of displaced air. Jack worked his fingertips under it and pulled. It came free, revealing not a hollow space, but a small, recessed compartment. Inside was a tarnished steel plate with a single, unadorned keyhole, not for a house key, but for something smaller, more specialized. He thought for a moment, then reached into his wallet. Tucked in a hidden flap was a small, flat key he'd carried for years, given to him by his grandfather on his 18th birthday. "For a box you might need to open one day," was all Samuel had said. Jack had never found the box. Until now. With a steady hand, he inserted the key. It fit perfectly. He turned it, and a series of heavy, internal tumblers could be heard retracting deep within the wall. The entire stone section of the hearth, a solid block of rock weighing hundreds of pounds, swung inward as smoothly and silently as a bank vault door. It revealed a set of steep metal stairs descending into absolute blackness. A draft of cool, dry air washed over him, carrying the scent of ozone, gun oil, and old machinery. This was no wine cellar. Jack pulled a heavy-duty flashlight from his pack and switched it on. Kaiser remained at the top of the stairs, a silent, watchful guardian. Jack descended, the sound of his boots echoing softly on the metal treads. At the bottom, he swept the beam across the space, and his breath caught in his throat. He was standing in a miniature command center. The room was a concrete-lined vault about 20 feet square. One wall was lined with weapon racks, rifles, shotguns, and sidearms, all meticulously cleaned and stored in climate-controlled cases. Below them were crates of ammunition. Another wall held an array of analog communications gear, shortwave radios, signal scramblers, and surveillance equipment that looked like it belonged in a Cold War spy film. A large world map was pinned to the third wall, dotted with pins and marked with faded handwritten notes in a cipher he didn't recognize. In the center of the room was a heavy steel workbench. On it, a vintage telegraph key sat next to a modern satellite phone, and against the far wall were glass display cases filled not with valuables, but with artifacts, an ornate, curved dagger with a jade handle, a collection of passports from a dozen different countries, all bearing his grandfather's picture under various names, a plain, leather-bound book resting on a square of velvet. Jack stood in the center of the vault, his flashlight beam gliding over the incredible collection. This was his grandfather's secret life. This was the real Samuel Corrigan. Not just a reclusive old man, but an operative, an agent, a man who lived a life of shadows and secrets. The inheritance wasn't a rundown cabin on a cliff. It was a legacy, and he was standing right in the middle of it. Time seemed to bend inside the concrete vault. Jack moved with the deliberate economy of motion ingrained in him by years of training, his flashlight beam cutting precise swaths through the darkness. First, he did a full sweep, checking the corners, making sure he was truly alone, that there were no hidden alarms or traps his initial inspection had missed. Satisfied, his attention returned to the artifacts that represented the disjointed story of his grandfather's life. His gaze settled on the heavy steel workbench. Amid the collection of strange artifacts, one item seemed more personal, more direct, a small, steel lockbox, its surface bare of any markings. The plain, leather-bound book sat beside it, but the box felt like the designated starting point. It was secured with a sturdy combination lock. Jack examined it closely. It was a 4-digit, military-grade lock. He thought for a moment, his mind cycling through possibilities, birthdays, addresses. Too simple. Samuel Corrigan was never simple. He thought of numbers that meant something to him. Jack. The date he enlisted. The day he graduated from Bud/S training. He tried the date he received his SEAL Trident. The rollers clicked into place. The lock sprang open with a soft metallic sigh. Samuel had known. He had been watching all along. Inside, resting on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, thick envelope made of heavy vellum. His name, Jack, was written across the front in his grandfather's distinctive, sharp script. With a sense of reverence, he lifted the envelope. It felt heavy, heavier than just paper. He broke the wax seal and unfolded the single sheet inside. The letter began without preamble. Jack. If you are reading this, then you found your way through the stone and the steel. And I was right about you. I was always right about you. Trust the dog. He sees the world more clearly than most men. What you see around you is not a treasure. Do not think of it in terms of monetary value, for that is a fool's measure. This room is a legacy. It is a collection of tools, secrets, and stories gathered over a lifetime lived in the shadows. Its purpose is singular, to protect those who cannot protect themselves. There are wolves in this world, son, that prey on the unsuspecting. I spent my life hunting them. These walls hold the teeth I used. My passing will not go unnoticed. The quiet I maintained for the last decade was a carefully constructed fiction. Old enemies, old rivals will stir. They will see my death as an opportunity to reclaim what they believe is theirs. They will come for this place. They will come for what is inside it. Do not underestimate them. They are ruthless, and they will see you as nothing more than an obstacle. This is not a burden I pass to you lightly. It is a choice. You can lock this room, walk away, and live the life you have earned. No one would blame you. Or you can take up the work. The choice is yours and yours alone. The real wars are not fought on any declared battlefield. The answers you need, the history you deserve to know, are in the leather journal on this desk. It is the key to everything. But like any key, it is useless until you learn how to turn it. Be careful who you trust. The world is more complicated than it appears. Your grandfather. Samuel. Jack read the letter twice, the words sinking in, rearranging the very foundation of his world. The quiet, stern man who had taught him to fish on the Au River was a hunter of wolves. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was a recruitment. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. He turned his attention to the leather-bound book. It was old, the cover worn smooth at the edges. He opened it. The pages were filled not with words, but with dense, intricate script. It was a labyrinth of symbols, numbers, and strange, angular characters, all handwritten with meticulous precision. It was a cipher, but more complex than any military code he'd ever encountered. This was a layered, bespoke system, a lifetime's work of concealment. He knew it once he was out of his depth. He spent another hour in the vault committing its contents to memory before climbing the stairs. He closed the heavy stone door, hearing the deep thud of the locks engaging, and slid the hearthstone back into place. Kaiser, who had waited patiently, came and nudged his hand, sensing the change in his master. For the next 2 days, Jack worked, his mind processing. He created a detailed mental map of the vault, memorized the layout of the weapons, and spent hours staring at a digital photo he'd taken of one of the journal pages, trying to find a pattern, a foothold. Nothing. He couldn't take this to his chain of command. This was outside any official channels, a ghost operation left by a ghost. He needed a specialist, an expert, someone who wouldn't ask the wrong questions. His research led him to the Port Sentinel Maritime Museum, a respected institution in the heart of the town. He found an article on their lead historian, Dr. Anya Sharma, an expert in Great Lakes maritime history, and, more importantly, a recognized specialist in historical cryptography. She had recently curated an exhibit on coded communications used in shipping during Prohibition. It was a long shot, but it was the only one he had. He found her in a brightly lit archival room in the back of the museum, a space that smelled of old paper and preservation chemicals. She was bent over a large, salt-stained ship's log, a magnifying glass in one hand. Dr. Anya Sharma was not what he expected. She had sharp, intelligent green eyes that seemed to miss nothing, and wavy, dark hair pulled back into a messy but functional bun, with a few stray strands framing a face that was more striking than classically beautiful. She wore a simple blouse and jeans, a smudge of archival dust on her cheek. She looked up as he approached, her expression one of polite, focused inquiry. "Can I help you?" Her voice was clear and direct. "Dr. Sharma," Jack began, his voice low and measured. "My name is Jack Corrigan. I was told you might be able to help me with a historical document." She set her magnifying glass down, giving him her full attention. She took in his athletic build, his short military haircut, and the quiet intensity in his eyes. She was used to dealing with academics and history buffs. This man was something else entirely. "I specialize in maritime history," she said, a hint of skepticism in her voice. What kind of document are we talking about? It's a private family journal, Jack said, choosing his words carefully. My grandfather kept it. The thing is, it's written in some kind of code. He pulled out his phone and showed her the picture of the journal page. Anya leaned in, her professional curiosity instantly overriding her initial caution. Her green eyes narrowed, scanning the intricate symbols. A spark of intense concentration lit her face. She was silent for a long moment, completely absorbed. This isn't a standard cipher, she murmured, almost to herself. It has elements of a Vigenère cipher, but it's layered. The base symbols. They don't belong to any known alphabet. This is a bespoke system, a highly sophisticated one. Whoever created this was brilliant. And paranoid. She looked up at him, her eyes alight with an intellectual fire. Where did you say this came from? My grandfather, Jack repeated. He was a private man. For the first time since he found the vault, Jack saw a path forward. He also saw a complication. There was an immediate, unspoken connection between them, a shared wavelength of focus and intensity. But he knew that bringing her into this was a risk. He was asking her to step into the shadows that had defined his grandfather's life. I need someone to help me make sense of it, Jack said, his gaze steady on hers. Someone I can trust. Anya leaned back, studying his face. He wasn't just a man with a puzzle. There was a weight to him, a sense of danger and purpose that was both intriguing and alarming. The academic in her was screaming to take on the challenge. The rational part of her brain was telling her to run. A project like this would take time, she said slowly. And I would need to see the original document. I can arrange that, Jack said. She made her decision. The mystery was too compelling to resist. All right, Mr. Corrigan, she said, a small smile touching her lips. You have my attention. Let's see what secrets your grandfather was hiding. Jack drove Anya up the winding private road to the lookout as the afternoon sun began its descent, painting the underside of the heavy clouds in shades of bruised orange and purple. When the imposing structure came into view, perched on the edge of the world, Anya let out a low whistle. You weren't kidding when you said it was remote, she said, her green eyes wide as she took in the stark lines of the concrete and timber fortress. It looks like it's holding on for dear life. It was built to hold on, Jack replied, parking the truck. Let's hope it still can. Inside, he led her down the metal stairs into the vault. The moment Anya saw the command center, her academic curiosity morphed into pure, unadulterated awe. She moved slowly around the room, running a hand over the cool steel of the radio equipment and peering at the strange artifacts in their glass cases. My God, she whispered. This is a private intelligence archive. Your grandfather. Was more than he seemed, Jack finished for her, placing the thick leather journal on the steel table. This is what I need you to see. For the next few hours, they were a study and focused collaboration. Anya, with her brilliant, analytical mind, dove into the cipher. She spread her notes out, cross-referencing symbols, testing theories, her brow furrowed in concentration. Jack sat opposite her, a quiet, watchful presence. He couldn't follow the intricate dance of her cryptographic analysis, but he could provide context, answering her questions about military terminology or geographical locations he recognized from the map on the wall. A strange intimacy developed between them in the cool, still air of the vault, a connection forged in a dead man's secrets. I'm starting to see a pattern, Anya said, her voice filled with the thrill of discovery. It's a polyalphabetic substitution cipher, but the key isn't a word. It's a series of numbers derived from a set of coordinates. The coordinates change every 5 pages, and I think they correspond to the pins on that map. She pointed to the wall, and Jack felt a surge of admiration for her intellect. She was unlocking a lifetime of secrets in a matter of hours. It was Kaiser who broke the quiet concentration. From the top of the stairs in the main room, a low, guttural growl echoed off the floorboards. It wasn't a warning bark, but something deeper, more menacing. Jack was on his feet in an instant, his entire demeanor shifting from quiet partner to coiled predator. Stay here, he commanded Anya in a low, urgent voice. He moved up the stairs, Kaiser meeting him at the top, the hackles on his back raised. The dog wasn't looking toward the door or the road, but toward the dense, fog-shrouded forest that bordered the property to the east. Jack moved to one of the narrow windows, his body pressed against the wall, and peered out. For a moment, he saw nothing but the swaying trees and the encroaching dusk. Then, a flicker of movement, a glint of light where none should be, the reflection off an optical lens. Someone was out there watching them. Surveillance with high-tech gear. This was no casual trespasser. His grandfather's words echoed in his head. They will come for this place, Anya, he called down, his voice calm but hard as iron. Lock the vault door from the inside. There's a deadbolt on the frame. Don't open it for any reason until I get back. Do you understand? He heard her, frightened, but firm. Yes. The heavy thud of the vault door locking echoed up the stairs. Jack turned to his dog. Kaiser, guard the house. The dog seemed to understand perfectly, planting himself in the center of the room, facing the door, a silent, formidable guardian. Jack slipped out a side door, melting into the shadows like a ghost. He moved with a silence that defied his size, using the terrain, the rocks, the dense underbrush as his allies. He took no direct path, but made a wide, circling approach, moving upwind, his senses analyzing every broken twig, every rustle of leaves. The fog was his friend, dampening sound and concealing his approach. After 10 minutes of silent, painstaking movement, he spotted him. The man was a professional. He was dressed in dark, practical tactical gear and was set up in a sniper's nest of ferns and fallen logs about 200 yards from the house. A high-powered spotting scope was mounted on a tripod, and a camera with a telephoto lens lay beside him. He was patient, focused, his attention entirely on the lookout. Jack crept closer until he was less than 15 feet away, concealed behind the trunk of an ancient pine. He could make out the man's features now, a hard, lean face, a scar that cut through one eyebrow, and a nearly invisible earpiece. He was part of a team. Jack made no sound. He offered no challenge. He exploded from the tree line, a blur of motion. The mercenary, professional though he was taken completely by surprise. He barely had time to turn before Jack was on him. It wasn't a fight. It was a clinical takedown. Jack's hand chopped down on the man's wrist, sending the camera tumbling to the ground. A palm heel strike to the jaw snapped the man's head back, and a quick leg sweep took him off his feet. He went down with a grunt, the air driven from his lungs. Before he could recover, Jack had a knee on his chest and the cold, hard steel of his combat knife against the man's throat. "Who do you work for?" Jack's voice was a lethal whisper. The man's eyes were wide with shock and pain, but also with a flicker of professional respect. He just glared, spitting a wad of blood onto the damp earth. "Talk," Jack pressed, the knife biting into skin, "or your team will find what the forest animals leave behind." The man just smirked, but his eyes flicked to his left for a fraction of a second. A tell. He was trying to buy time for his partners. Jack didn't hesitate. He brought the pommel of the knife down hard on the man's temple. Not enough to kill, but enough to render him unconscious for a good long while. He quickly and efficiently bound the man's hands and feet with zip ties, gagged him with a piece of his own shirt, and disabled his communications gear. Then, he vanished back into the woods as silently as he had appeared. He returned to the house, the cold reality of the situation settling over him. He knocked on the stone fireplace. "Anya, it's me." The vault door swung open, and she emerged, her face pale, but her eyes resolute. "What happened?" "We have uninvited guests," Jack said, his voice grim. "My grandfather was right." Without another word, he went to a master control panel hidden behind a loose bookshelf. He threw a series of heavy switches. With a low hum, power surged through the house. Steel shutters, previously invisible, slid down over the narrow windows, plunging the room into near darkness. A series of soft clicks from the perimeter indicated that motion sensors and magnetic locks had been activated. The lookout was no longer a cabin. It was a lockdown facility. He turned to Anya, who was watching him, her arms wrapped around herself. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a fierce spark of determination. "They'll be back," he said simply. "You need to be able to defend yourself." He led her to the center of the room. "I'm not going to teach you how to fight. I'm going to teach you how to survive an attack, how to create an opening to escape." For the next hour, under the dim emergency lights of the secured house, he taught her. He showed her how to break a grip, where to strike for maximum effect, eyes, throat, groin, and how to use her smaller size to her advantage. There was a new level of intimacy in his touch. It was no longer just intellectual or emotional, but fiercely protective. He would position her hands, guide her movements, his voice a low, steady murmur by her ear. She was a fast learner, her mind absorbing the brutal logic of his lessons. When they were finished, they stood in the silent, reinforced room. The only sound was the howling of the wind outside the steel-plated windows. They were locked in together, a team forged by a dead man's secrets and a very real, present danger. The mystery had become a fight for survival. The night in the lookout was a world unto itself. With the steel shutters locked down, all sense of time was lost. The only light came from a few humming emergency lamps that cast long, dancing shadows. The only sound was the relentless roar of the wind and waves, a constant reminder of their isolation. Jack had retrieved the mercenaries' high-powered radio from the woods, and it now sat on the table, a silent trophy from their first encounter. Anya, her initial fear now tempered by a steely resolve, worked at the desk in the vault, her mind a refuge from the claustrophobic tension. Jack moved with a quiet, restless energy, checking the integrity of the shutters, monitoring the perimeter sensors. He was in his element, a defined battle space, a clear threat, and a singular objective. Protect the asset. In this case, the asset was both the secrets of the vault and the brilliant woman trying to unlock them. Just after midnight, the satellite phone on his grandfather's desk in the vault began to chirp. A jarring, alien sound in the stillness. It didn't ring. It was a request for a secure, encrypted communications link. Jack went down the stairs, his face a stone mask. He motioned for Anya to be silent as he answered. A smooth, cultured voice with a faint, unplaceable European accent filled the small space. It was a voice accustomed to giving orders, imbued with the easy confidence of a man who rarely heard the word no. Mr. Corrigan. Jack. I trust you've had a chance to appreciate your grandfather's rustic taste in real estate. Who is this? Jack's voice was flat, betraying nothing. A small, amused chuckle. My name is Julian Croft. Your grandfather and I were old colleagues, competitors, you might say. I had a great deal of respect for Samuel. He was a master of his craft, which is why I'm calling you directly as a courtesy. Julian Croft. The name meant nothing, but the tone did. It was the sound of a predator circling. Samuel collected many things, Croft continued, his voice like silk sliding over steel. Things of historical and, more importantly, financial significance. He was a hoarder of secrets. I am prepared to offer you $5 million, cash, for the property and its entire contents. No questions asked. You can walk away, a wealthy man free to continue your admirable service to your country. A simple, clean transaction. It wasn't an offer. It was a threat wrapped in a business proposal. Croft knew about the vault. He knew what was inside. The property isn't for sale, Jack said, his words short and final. The silence on the other end of the line stretched, no longer friendly. When Croft spoke again, the silk was gone, leaving only the cold, hard steel beneath. That is an unfortunate decision, Mr. Corrigan. Your grandfather was a formidable man, but he made the mistake of growing old. You are making the mistake of being sentimental. I will take what is mine. The only variable is how much blood is spilled in the process. Consider your position carefully. The line went dead. Jack looked at Anya, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. Julian Croft, he said, the name tasting like ash. He's our wolf. The attack came 3 hours later, in the deepest part of the night. Kaiser gave the first warning, a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. The perimeter sensors on the approach road lit up on the control panel. 2 vehicles, moving without headlights. They're here, Jack said, his voice taking on a combat-ready calm. He handed Anya a radio. Stay in the vault. You'll be safe there. Keep working. Getting into that journal is our best weapon now. He moved into the main room, Kaiser at his heels, a shadow of lethal intent. Jack watched the sensor display. The attackers weren't trying for subtlety. This was a direct assault meant to overwhelm. He waited until their heat signatures were clustered at the narrowest point of the road, a spot where a rockfall had created a natural bottleneck years ago. Then he pressed a red button on the control panel. A deep, concussive whump echoed from the hillside. It wasn't a fiery explosion, but a shaped charge, a calculated demolition. Tons of rock and earth, loosened by the charge his grandfather had evidently placed long ago, came crashing down, completely blocking the road. The vehicle assault was over, but Jack knew this was just the opening move. Croft's men were professionals. The radio crackled. It was Anya, her voice strained, but clear. Jack, something else. The old sonar equipment down here, it's picking something up. Small signatures in the water at the base of the cliff. Climbers, of course. A 2-pronged attack. How many? Jack asked, moving to the armored door of the deck. I think 4, maybe 5. They're on their way up. Good work, Anya. Keep me updated. He unbolted the heavy door and stepped out onto the open deck into the teeth of the storm. The wind and rain were a physical force that tore at him. Below, Lake Superior was a chaos of black water and white foam. He clipped a safety line to a steel ring mounted on the deck and leaned out over the edge. Through the spray, he saw them. 4 figures in dark climbing gear moving with practiced skill up the sheer rock face with ropes and pitons. They were still 100 feet below, but they were moving fast. Jack didn't use a firearm. The sound would give away his position too easily. Instead, he grabbed a heavy fire hose coiled in a storage locker on the deck. He braced himself, aimed the nozzle over the edge, and cranked the valve. A high-pressure torrent of frigid lake water, drawn by a powerful pump from the lake below, slammed into the rock face. It was like a localized tidal wave. The lead climber, taken completely by surprise, lost his grip and was swept from the cliff. His scream was swallowed by the storm. His safety line caught him, but he was left dangling, incapacitated. The others pressed themselves into the rock, trying to ride out the deluge. It bought him time. He could hear them shouting, their plan in disarray. He secured the hose and moved back inside, Kaiser growling at the cliffside window. They knew they were spotted. Their only option now was to try and breach the deck. One of the climbers, bolder than the rest, managed to toss a grappling hook over the deck railing. A moment later, a dark figure vaulted onto the deck, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He never saw Kaiser. The dog launched himself from the doorway, a 90-pound missile of fur and fury. He hit the man square in the chest, driving him backward against the railing. The pistol flew from his grasp and skittered across the wet wood. Before the man could recover, Jack was on him. A quick, disabling blow, and he was unconscious. The attack was broken. The remaining climbers, their leader gone and their element of surprise lost, began a hasty retreat back down the cliff face. Jack dragged the unconscious man inside and bound him. The immediate threat was over, but a cold realization washed over him. Croft hadn't just been targeting the house, he had been targeting the people in it. He knew Jack wasn't alone. Anya was no longer just a consultant. She was a target. Her quiet life in Port Sentinel, her work at the museum, all of it was compromised. He went down to the vault. Anya was standing by the desk, her face pale, but her eyes were blazing. She had heard the entire thing over the radio. "They're gone," he said. "For now." She just nodded, her throat too tight for words. "You can't go back to your apartment," he stated, his voice allowing no argument. "It's the first place they'll look for you. You aren't safe anywhere but here." She looked around the cold, concrete room, then back at him. She saw the absolute certainty in his stormy eyes, the fierce protective instinct that had taken root. This place, this fortress on the edge of the world, had become her only sanctuary. And the man standing before her, a soldier forged in the world's most dangerous places, was its keeper. Her keeper. "Okay," she whispered, a single word that sealed their alliance, turning them from partners into something more, something deeper, forged in shared secrets and shared danger. The days following the attack passed, marked not by sunrises and sunsets, which they couldn't see through the steel shutters, but by the rhythm of their work. The lookout became their entire world, a fortified island against a sea of unseen enemies. Jack established a routine with military precision. He patrolled the perimeter at dawn and dusk, checked the integrity of the defenses, and spent hours cleaning and disassembling the weapons from the vault, his movements fluid and economical. He was a silent, vigilant guardian, and his calm presence was a steadying anchor in the tense quiet. Anya, meanwhile, waged her own war in the silence of the vault. She was fueled by black coffee and a burning curiosity. The journal was her adversary, a puzzle box built by a ghost, and she attacked it with relentless intellect. The initial breakthrough had been exhilarating, but the layers of the cipher were more complex than she could have imagined. Samuel had woven multiple cryptographic methods together, using shifting keys based not only on map coordinates but on astronomical charts and obscure historical dates she had to cross-reference from the books on the shelves. It was painstaking work. There were moments of deep frustration when she would push her chair back from the desk, her eyes stinging, ready to give up. In those moments, Jack would appear with a fresh mug of coffee or a plate of food, saying nothing. His steady presence was enough to give her the strength to dive back in. He watched her, amazed at the tenacity of her mind, the way she fought with symbols and patterns as fiercely as he would fight a physical enemy. Then, on the fourth day, she broke through. "Jack," she called, her voice echoing up the metal stairs, a mix of exhaustion and pure triumph. "I've got it. I've found the master key." He was down the stairs in an instant. She pointed to a page in her notebook, a chaotic scrawl of symbols and equations that resolved into a single, elegant string. "It wasn't just the map," she explained, her green eyes bright with intellectual fire. "It was a three-part key. The map coordinates give you the base cipher. The star charts from an old naval almanac give you the transposition index. And the final piece, the publication date of a first edition copy of Moby Dick on the shelf upstairs. It was a lock with 3 separate keys. With the master key, the journal began to give up its secrets. The first few dozen pages were a revelation. They weren't the ramblings of a spy, but the meticulous records of a protector. Samuel Corrigan had been part of an informal, clandestine network, a group of like-minded individuals from various intelligence agencies who operated outside the sanction of any one government. They called themselves the Wardens. They didn't fight wars. They hunted monsters. The entries chronicled missions that read like fiction: the recovery of priceless artifacts stolen by war criminals in the chaos after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the extraction of a scientist's family from a rogue state, the dismantling of a human trafficking ring operating out of the shadowy ports of Southeast Asia. Each entry was concise, detailing the objective, the method, and the outcome, followed by a personal reflection. Jack saw his grandfather in a new light, not just as an operative, but as a man driven by a deep, unwavering moral compass. He was a hero, Anya whispered, reading over his shoulder. He was a soldier, Jack corrected gently, though he understood her meaning. They worked late into the night, translating page after page. They learned of Julian Croft, a former MI6 agent who had been one of the founding wardens. Croft was brilliant, charismatic, but ultimately corrupted by greed. He believed the artifacts they recovered, the secrets they unearthed, should be sold to the highest bidder, not returned or protected. He had tried to seize control of the network, and when he failed, he was cast out, becoming their most bitter enemy. He had been hunting Samuel and his legacy ever since. Then Anya's finger stopped on a particular entry dated almost a year ago. It was the last entry, written in a hand that was slightly less steady. Croft is closing in. The years have taken my strength. I cannot run forever. I have moved the heart of our work, the final safeguard, to the place where the sea wages its ceaseless war against the stone. It is a place of terrible light and constant shadow. He will not think to look for it there. Not at first. For Jack, the rest of the story is waiting at 47 degrees 10:55 inches and 87 degrees 13:31 inches width. Jack felt a chill run down his spine. He knew those coordinates. Every sailor and fisherman on the Great Lakes knew them. Spectre Rock Lighthouse, he said, his voice a low whisper. Anya quickly typed the coordinates into her laptop. A satellite image filled the screen, showing a desolate, guano-streaked basalt rock miles from shore, crowned by a squat, decommissioned lighthouse. Even in the grainy photo, it looked forbidding. They call it the loneliest place in North America, Anya said, reading from an article. One of the most notorious lighthouses in the world. Dozens of keepers went mad from the isolation and the storms. It was decommissioned in the 1950s. Now it's a private columbarium, a place to store cremated remains. It's said to be almost impossible to reach except on the calmest of days. Where the sea wages its ceaseless war against the stone, Jack quoted from the journal. That's it. It has to be. A new, dangerous energy filled the vault. This was it. The next move. It's a trap, Jack said, his mind already shifting into operational planning mode. Croft may not have known about it before, but if he's been tracking my grandfather's recent activities, he could have figured it out. He'll either be waiting for us or he'll follow us there. So what do we do? Anya asked, her gaze steady on his. We go, Jack said without hesitation. But we go prepared. We go on our terms. The next 24 hours were a blur of intense preparation. Jack laid out an array of weapons on the steel table, a suppressed Sig Sauer P226, a compact M4 carbine, and his combat knife. He packed a tactical go bag with night vision optics, medical supplies, breaching tools, and climbing gear. He knew landing on the lighthouse would be treacherous. They'd have to scale part of the rock to reach the entrance. He needed a boat, not some charter from the marina, that would be too conspicuous. He remembered an entry in his grandfather's journal about a trusted contact in the nearby fishing town of Munising, a man named Gus, a former Navy bosun's mate who owed Samuel his life. While Jack planned the tactical approach, Anya tackled a different problem. She packed her own go bag with her laptop, a satellite modem, and all her notes. Her job would be to serve as their overwatch, their communications and intelligence hub. That evening, as a storm began to brew offshore, they stood together on the deck. The steel shutters were retracted for the first time in days. The wind was cold and sharp, whipping Anya's hair across her face. Are you sure about this, Anya? Jack asked, his voice deeper than the wind. This is beyond what you signed up for. She turned to him, her green eyes clear and unwavering in the fading light. Your grandfather wrote that he protected people who couldn't protect themselves. What he started, what Croft is trying to steal, it matters. I can't walk away now. We can't. In that moment, standing on the edge of the cliff with a storm gathering inside and out, he no longer saw her as an academic he had dragged into his world, but as a partner, an equal. He reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from her cheek, his touch lingering for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was a small gesture, but it held the weight of all they had been through and all that was to come. "Okay," he said. "We go at dawn." The fishing town of Munising huddled against the bay under a sky the color of wet stone. The air was thick with the smell of diesel, salt, and fish. Jack found Gus on the docks, a man who looked as though he were carved from the same salt-worn timber as his boat. Gus was old, with a face like a topographical map of a hard life. His hands were gnarled and powerful from a lifetime of hauling nets. His eyes, a pale, faded blue, held the quiet wisdom of a man who understood the temper of the Great Lake. When Jack mentioned Samuel Corrigan's name, Gus's weathered face softened for a moment. "Samuel pulled me out of the water off the coast of Danong when I was no older than you are now," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Whatever you need, son, it's yours." An hour before dawn, under the cover of a building storm, Gus's sturdy fishing trawler, the Sea Serpent, slipped out of the harbor. Jack, Anya, and Kaiser huddled in the small cabin. Gus expertly navigated through the churning, slate-gray waves that grew more violent as they left the relative shelter of the coast. The journey was a brutal, physical ordeal. The boat was tossed about mercilessly, and the roar of the wind and water was deafening. "She's a nasty one today," Gus shouted over the roar of the engine. "They call that rock a monster for a reason. The lake never gives it up easy." As they neared the shoal, Spectre Rock rose from the waves like a jagged black tooth. The lighthouse, squat and defiant, seemed fused to its peak. Waves crashed against its base with explosive force, sending plumes of white spray hundreds of feet into the air. There was no dock, only a small, rusted derrick and a sheer rock face. "This is as close as I can get you," Gus yelled, skillfully holding the boat steady against the violent swells. "The rest is up to you." Jack worked with grim efficiency. He rigged a line to Kaiser's harness and, with Anya's help, lowered the dog into a heavy-duty inflatable raft. He and Anya followed. Paddling the last 100 yards was a battle against a vicious current that threatened to smash them against the rocks. When they finally reached the base, Jack secured the raft and began to climb, free climbing the first 20 feet with practiced ease before setting a line for Anya and hauling their gear up. They found the entrance, a heavy iron door set deep into the rock, its surface pitted and rusted from a century of salt and storms. It was secured with a massive, ancient padlock. Jack wasted no time trying to pick it. He used a small hydraulic tool from his pack, and the shackle snapped with a sharp crack. The air that rushed out from within was cold and smelled of stone, decay, and the faint, ghostly scent of lamp oil. Inside, the lighthouse was a hollow, cylindrical tomb. A rusted iron spiral staircase clung to the damp, curved wall, ascending into darkness. They went up, their flashlight beams cutting through the gloom, revealing peeling paint and the ghosts of a long-abandoned life. At the top, in the lantern room, they found it. The wind howled and shrieked against the thick glass panes, which were cracked but miraculously still intact. In the center of the room, bolted to the floor, was a heavy, sea-worn wooden chest. Jack knelt and examined the lock. It was a complex, multi-roller mechanism, but there was no keyhole. Instead, a small compass rose was inlaid on the lid. Jack remembered the carving on the fireplace stone. This was another puzzle. He turned the rose, listening. He felt more than heard the subtle clicks of the tumblers falling into place as he aligned it to a specific bearing, the bearing from the lookout to the lighthouse. With a final, deep thud, the lock released. He lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, was not a treasure of gold or jewels, but the treasure of a life, a faded photograph of a young woman, Jack's grandmother, a worn deck of playing cards that had belonged to his great-grandfather from the First World War, and another envelope with his name on it. He opened it. The letter was short. "Jack. If you made it here, you know what is at stake. The fight is yours now. Everything Croft has built is a house of cards. This is the wind that will blow it away. Protect the legacy. Trust yourself. I am proud of you." Beneath the letter was a thick, black ledger. Jack opened it. Page after page was filled with Samuel's precise handwriting, detailing every one of Croft's illegal dealings, offshore bank account numbers, names of corrupt officials, shipping routes for smuggled arms, dates of assassinations. It was a complete and utter indictment of a criminal empire. This was the heart of the work, the safeguard. Suddenly, Kaiser, who had been standing guard at the top of the stairs, let out a low, vicious growl. Jack looked at Anya, his eyes hardening. "They're here." He grabbed the ledger, stuffed it into its waterproof bag, and slung it over his shoulder. "Bottom of the stairs," he ordered Anya. "Stay behind me. Kaiser, with me." He peered through one of the grimy lantern room windows. A sleek, black inflatable boat was fighting the waves at the base of the rock. Figures in dark tactical gear were already beginning the climb. At their head was a man with an air of arrogant command, Julian Croft. The fight began on the spiral staircase. The narrow, decaying iron steps became a vertical kill zone. Jack took out the first two men from above, using the darkness and the element of surprise. They had been prepared for a fight, but not from a shadow who moved without sound and struck with brutal efficiency. A third mercenary rounded a bend below, rifle raised. Before Jack could fire, Kaiser launched himself from the step above, a blur of fur and teeth. The dog hit the man with the force of a sledgehammer, sending him tumbling backward down the stairs with a choked cry. Anya, huddled at the base of the stairs, proved her mettle. When another soldier tried to rush past the chaos, she grabbed a heavy, rusted fire extinguisher from the wall and swung it with all her might into his knee, buckling him to the ground. Jack moved down, clearing the stairs, a silent, deadly wraith in the echoing darkness of the tower. He left a trail of unconscious or disabled men behind him. The fight was fast, brutal, and one-sided. He was in his element, the close quarters amplifying his skills. He reached the bottom and found Anya standing over the man she had taken down, her chest heaving, the heavy extinguisher still in her hands. Kaiser stood guard beside her, growling at the open doorway. A figure stepped out of the storm and into the entryway, his silhouette framed against the raging sea. Julian Croft. He was tall, impeccably dressed despite the weather, his silver hair plastered to his head. He held a pistol casually, and his cold, intelligent eyes took in the scene with a flicker of annoyance, not surprise. "Impressive, Mr. Corrigan," Croft said, his voice cutting through the roar of the storm. "Truly, your grandfather would be proud. A pity you inherited his sentimentality along with his skills." He glanced at the bag on Jack's back. "Give me the ledger, and I'll let the good doctor live. A final professional courtesy." Jack pushed Anya behind him. "It's over, Croft." "Is it?" Croft smiled, a cold, humorless thing. He tossed his pistol to the side. It clattered on the stone floor. "Your grandfather and I had our disagreements. Let's settle this the old way. Man to man. Winner take all." It was a challenge Jack couldn't refuse. He drew his combat knife. Croft produced one of his own, a sleek, modern blade. The final battle was not a flurry of action, but a deadly, calculated dance in the confined space at the base of the lighthouse. Croft was skilled, his movements precise and economical, the product of a lifetime in the trade. But Jack was younger, stronger, and fueled by a righteous fury. It was a brutal ballet of feints, parries, and strikes. The clang of steel echoed off the stone walls. In the end, it was Croft's arrogance that was his undoing. He lunged, overextending, going for a finishing blow. Jack pivoted, using Croft's momentum against him, and in a single fluid motion, disarmed him and slammed him hard against the curved stone wall. The fight was over. Jack stood over his defeated foe, his breath coming in ragged gasps, the storm raging outside, and a quiet victory settling within. The storm broke with the dawn. As the first pale, watery rays of morning filtered through the grimy windows of the lantern room, the fury of the wind and sea began to subside, leaving a world washed clean and utterly exhausted. Jack had bound Croft and his surviving men. Their professional arrogance was shattered, leaving only the sullen resentment of defeat. Gus, true to his word, returned with the tide, his old trawler appearing through the dissipating fog like a ghost ship. The transfer of prisoners was a grim, silent affair. Jack handed Croft over to the old sailor with a quiet instruction. "Take them to the Coast Guard station at Grand Marais. Tell them you found them shipwrecked. They'll figure out the rest soon enough." Gus just nodded, his pale blue eyes showing a deep, unquestioning understanding. He knew better than to ask. Elias Parker's world had always operated on trust, not explanations. As the sea serpent departed, carrying the remnants of Julian Croft's ambition back to civilization, Jack and Anya stood alone on the rock, with only Kaiser for company. The air was cold, sharp, and tasted of victory. Jack looked at Anya, her face smudged with grime, her hair a tangled mess from the wind, and had never seen anyone more beautiful. He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "You were amazing," he said, his voice hoarse with an emotion he rarely allowed himself to show. She leaned into his touch, a tired but genuine smile gracing her lips. "I had a good teacher." The journey back to the mainland was quiet, a time for silent reflection. The ledger, stowed safely in Jack's bag, felt like a physical weight, a responsibility passed from one generation to the next. Back in Port Sentinel, Jack didn't go to the local authorities. Croft's network was a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels. He couldn't risk the ledger falling into the wrong hands. Instead, He consulted his grandfather's journal one last time. Tucked into a secret pocket in the back cover was a name and a secure contact number: General Robert Fitzpatrick, a stern old guardsman in the Justice Department and one of the original wardens. The meeting was arranged for the next day in a quiet, anonymous conference room in Detroit. General Fitzpatrick was a man who seemed carved from granite. He was in his 70s, with a ramrod straight posture and eyes that had seen the best and worst of humanity and were impressed by neither. He listened without interruption as Jack laid out the events of the past week, his expression unreadable. When Jack finished, he slid the black ledger across the polished table. Fitzpatrick opened it, his experienced eyes scanning the meticulous entries. He was silent for a long time, the only sound in the room the soft rustle of turning pages. Finally, he closed it, his hand resting on the cover. "Samuel was the best of us," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The most dedicated. When he went into seclusion, we thought the fight had gone out of him. We were wrong. He was simply forging his final weapon." He looked at Jack directly, his gaze sharp and appraising. "This ledger will allow us to dismantle Croft's entire operation from the top down. It will be a quiet, surgical affair. No headlines. But the world will be a safer place. Your grandfather did this country, and the world, one last great service." "He told me it was a choice," Jack said. "To take up the work or walk away." "And what have you chosen?" Fitzpatrick asked, the question hanging in the air. "I'm a soldier, General," Jack replied. "The fight found me. I'm not walking away." A flicker of something, approval, respect, crossed the old general's eyes. "Good. The wardens have been dormant for too long. Perhaps it's time they were woken up. We'll be in touch, Mr. Corrigan." Jack left the meeting feeling as though a great weight had been both lifted from and settled upon his shoulders. He had delivered the weapon. He had honored his grandfather's final mission. He returned to the lookout that evening to find Anya waiting for him on the deck. She had been busy. The steel shutters were retracted, and the golden light of the setting sun flooded the main room, chasing away the last of the shadows. The smell of coffee and a crackling fire in the hearth drifted out to meet him. The fortress was gone, in its place was a home. Kaiser trotted out to greet him, nudging his hand before settling at Anya's feet. Jack walked over and stood beside her, his gaze following hers out over the vast, shimmering expanse of Lake Superior. The sky was a blaze of orange, pink, and gold. "It's over," he said quietly. "No," she replied, turning to him, her green eyes soft in the warm light. "It's not, is it?" He knew what she meant. The battle with Croft was finished, but the work, the legacy, was just beginning. He was no longer just a Navy SEAL, an instrument of national policy. He was something else now, a warden, a guardian who operated in the spaces between the light and the shadows. "No," he admitted, a small smile touching his lips. "It's not." He looked down at her, the brilliant, brave woman who had faced down ciphers and soldiers with equal courage, who had seen the darkest parts of his world and hadn't flinched. The connection that had sparked in a dusty museum archive had been forged into something unbreakable in the crucible of the lighthouse. He didn't need to say the words. He just leaned down and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of desperate passion, but one of deep, profound recognition. It was a kiss that tasted of lake salt, wood smoke, and the promise of a shared future. It was the kiss of coming home. When they parted, they stood in comfortable silence, watching the last of the sun sink below the horizon. Kaiser rested his head on Jack's boot, a quiet, reassuring presence. Jack thought of the man who had left him this place. Samuel Corrigan had given him more than a property, more than a mission. He had given him a purpose that stretched beyond the uniform. He had given him a connection to a past he never knew and a chart for a future he had never imagined. He put his arm around Anya's shoulders, pulling her close. Together, the three of them, the soldier, the scholar, and the loyal guardian, stood on the edge of the continent, a new family forged in secrets and bound by honor. The lake and the sky stretched out before them, vast and full of potential. The journey was far from over. It was just beginning.